I'm Limitless Outdoors, and I'm here today and tomorrow to speak with you about the mindset of a successful hunter as it applies to saddle hunting. But the first thing that I want to do today is I see Chris Leopard is standing here. Josh Luck is up on stage. And I want to give them a nice golf clap round of applause for putting this together this year. It's been amazing. I'm very humbled to have been asked to come speak with you, especially when I'm wrapping things up on the coattails of like Greg Staggs and Jake Bush and Jacob Emery. I mean, those guys they're common household names here, and for most of you, you've probably never even heard of Aaron Ritter or Limitless Outdoors. So, Chris, thank you for asking me to be here and speak today. Another thing that I'd like to do is huge thanks, Chris, for doing the national anthem last night to kick this show off. I'm a veteran, and the flag and the national anthem is near and dear to my heart. And to start this event that's focused on hunters and Americans, that meant a lot to me. With that said, anybody that's here or listening, if you're a veteran, please raise your hand. Active duty, retired, separated, guard, reserve, I don't care. Thank you for your service. I really appreciate it. And any first responders, law enforcement, firemen, dispatch, medical, if you're here as well, I'd just like to give a shout out to all of you for keeping those in our borders safe while those in the military are going out and doing God's work outside of our borders. So the mindset of a successful hunter as it applies to saddle hunting, what does that mean to me? And three of the topics that I'll cover today is, one of them is called the 60-30-10 principle. We'll spend quite a bit of time on that. The next thing that we will cover is my outlook and thought process on tackling a technical tree. And then I'll wrap it up with the mentality of calm breeds calm and how that affects your saddle hunt. So to start, I'm gonna share a story about what has happened to me when I do not follow my own thought processes and mentalities, and how some of those failures can impact your hunt. So I transitioned from a Summit Viper to a Lone Wolf hand climber, and I knew that Summit Viper in and out. I had it rigged. I could do it with my eyes closed. And I met a guy in a Walmart parking lot, and I bought a Lone Wolf hand climber, and I checked it out on site to make sure it wasn't cracked or broken, and looked at the cables and whatnot, and gave him some cash. I went home with it, and the next morning the next afternoon I went out and I took it for a hunt without ever trying it. And I went down into the creek bottom on the property that I was leasing in a spot that I knew had a lot of sign. It was in November, it was the rut, and I had high hopes of seeing a good buck that afternoon. And I got set up and I started climbing that tree. And it was a beech nut tree. And I'd never climbed a beech nut tree. And I found out right away that beech nuts are really, really hard. They're really, really slick. And the Lone Wolf did not like to grip that tree. I was about 5 to 7 feet off the ground, and that Lone Wolf had webbing straps connected together. It was connecting the seat plate and the foot plate with a little plastic clip. 5 to 7 feet off the ground, one of the plastic clips failed me. It broke. I kept climbing. I made it to about 17 feet. The second clip failed me. So now I'm 17 feet off the ground, and I do not have anything keeping my seat and my feet connected together. I made it to 20. That's where I wanted to be. I got my gear settled. I got settled into that climber, but I was never really, quote unquote, settled. Every time I shifted in that stand, it wanted to shift with me. Every time I moved, that stand wanted to shift with me. And I was seeing a lot of activity that night. There was bucks chasing bucks and bucks chasing does, and deer were coming into one side of the thicket and deer were coming into the other side of the thicket. I was down in a creek bottom, and it was a holly thicket. And in southern Maryland, in that area, the deer really liked the hollies. All the scrapes, all the activity was in the holly thickets. And I had high hopes that I was going to see a nice buck that night, but I was not comfortable. One of the smartest things that I did that evening was I made the decision that despite how much activity I was seeing, that I was going to come down that tree in daylight. And I call the last hour of my hunt the ivory hour. You know, in the medical field, they have like the platinum, 10 minutes or all of that. Well, I call my last hour of hunting the ivory hour because that's when you typically see some of the best big buck movement. Despite everything that I was seeing that night, I knew that I wanted to come out of the stand in the daylight because I had been having a lot of issues with my climb. So I stowed all my gear, I lowered my bow and my pack. Typically when I climb, and whether it's a hand climber or my saddle, I climb with my pack on my back. I do not connect it to a hoist line with my bow. I don't carry two hoist lines. I put my bow on a line, I put my pack on my back, and I climb. Well, that evening, I decided to tie my pack into the hoist line with my bow, and I lowered them to the ground because I did not want to have anything more than my body weight when I was coming out of that tree. I got everything safely to the ground. I stood up and I turned around to start my descent, and as soon as I tried to put my left foot into that little plastic hook on a lone wolf, that foot plate shot out from underneath me and shattered 20 feet all the way to the ground. And I'm hanging there on my forearms on that little tiny seat plate of that lone wolf climber with my feet dangling underneath me. It's like, well, here I am. Fortunately for me, the property and home that I was leasing I was only a half mile into the timber, and the property owners were in the house doing some maintenance on that lease property. Had my phone in my pocket, so I pulled my phone out and I called him on the phone from hanging up in that tree, and I said, "This is where I'm at. Will you please bring a ladder out and come help me arrest out of this tree?" So he did. What were the big learning points for me in that story? I did not follow my 60-30-10 principle, and we're going to cover that here in a few minutes. So why is Aaron Ritter, who a one-legged guy that's months away from turning 50, that you all have never heard of, why am I standing up here talking to you guys? What's my background? Why should I be here? Well, as a saddle hunter, I'm an infant. I started saddle hunting in, was it 2019 that we connected, Alex? 2019. I'm an infant with some of the experience in this room. I'm a baby. I've been hunting for 40 years, and I spent 15 years in Navy Special Operations. And in that time, and a fireman, in that time frame, I spent hundreds of hours in some type of a harness. Under canopy, I have 200 free fall jumps, 4 of them from 19,500 feet. I've roped out of helicopters, I've roped down mountains, I've roped down the side of buildings. I've spent time in harnesses, and I'm super, super comfortable. As a fireman, we did a lot of technical rescue. Again, a lot of time in harnesses and ropes. I've dove to over 200 feet of seawater with lines all around me and deck cord in water that was so dark or murky that you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. And you'll learn in those environments to manage your stress levels and to know what your surroundings are and what you're doing. And everything that we do is practiced and rehearsed over and over and over. Hunting wise, listening to Jake and talking to Jake this weekend, that guy's he's a trophy killer. I grew up in Washington State. I started hunting in 1979. Washington doesn't manage their game that well, and the way they issue licenses and tags is totally different than you folks that grew up or hunt mainly in the Midwest and the East Coast. In Washington State, my entire life, I got one tag. I got to choose a rifle tag or an archery tag or a muzzleloader tag. Not all three, not two of the three, one. And that time period that you had to fill that tag, it could range from 8 days to 13 days, depending on where you were hunting and what type of weapon system you chose. That did not give you the opportunity to let something grow another year. The first legal animal that walked out and presented an ethical shot, we're going to put a tag on it and take it home. So when I first started whitetail hunting in 2014, I was swiftly surprised and opened up to a whole new world of hunting. Southern Maryland, when I first arrived in Southern Maryland in 2017, I could hunt from September to January, and I could harvest unlimited antlerless deer. It blew me away. So I'm not a trophy killer. I like to fill my freezer, and then I start worrying about whether or not I'm going to go harvest a quality deer. I hunted Roosevelt elk avidly for the majority of my life. All of that brings me back to, again, why am I standing up here talking to a room full of people that hunted whitetail their entire life and have killed deer far bigger than, I've never even seen them in the woods in the amount of time that I've been hunting whitetail. So I bring to you some knowledge on what makes me successful and safe and stress-free when I hunt. And the first thing is that 60-30-10 principle. So I don't know if anybody in here has ever heard of that before. Some of the ladies in here may have heard this 60-30-10 principle as it applies to how you paint your house, but mine's totally different. 60% knowledge, training, and tactics. 30% tools, equipment, or technology, and 10% luck. And the luck is there no matter whether you like it or not. You see, in my background, you can plan the best mission that you've ever planned, and it's not going to survive first contact. And the other part of that is the enemy always has a vote. And in our world, the enemy is the deer. So it doesn't matter how much time you spend planning your hunt. It doesn't matter how well you know your equipment. When you get out in the woods to pursue that deer, there is 10% luck. Jake talked about it today in his seminar. One of the commonalities that you're going to hear across the board today, Greg talked about it first this morning. Jake talked about it. I'm going to talk about it. It's repetition. It's having a system and knowing what you're doing and making that repeatable. And that will make you safe, stress-free, and successful. So let's start with 60%. I call 60% the KT tape of my hunt because it's my knowledge, it's my training, and my tactics. So first thing we're going to talk about is knowledge. There is so many platforms to gain knowledge in our industry. It's in magazines, it's in books, it's in VHS tapes, it's on YouTube, it's all over social media. You can find it everywhere. Not all of it is of value. Some of it is pearls of wisdom, and then there's that whole area in between, right? So I'll share a quick story of knowledge falling for a tactic that did not work out well for me, and I'll never do it again. And I heard it on YouTube one morning having coffee. So this gentleman was sharing one of his favorite rut tactics for whitetail. And his deal was he'd go out on a morning hunt and he would get in his tree early, which I like to do. I try to get up in my tree and settle somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes before daylight so that I can settle down, the woods can settle down, and I'm ready for that first deer to walk through my shooting lanes. Well, this guy says, hey, so like 10 minutes or so before shooting light, I like to give a short butt grunt. Because if there's any deer, if there's any bucks in the vicinity that might be walking away from me, I can turn them in my direction, and by the time they get to me, it's daylight and I can shoot. And I processed that for about half a day, and I was like, I'm gonna give that a shot. And I like to hunt open timber a lot, so it can be difficult patterning deer in open timber, especially if you're new to the area. So they can come in any direction. So I went up to where I was hunting for that 3 days, and that first morning I went out down a creek and I got up on a bench in between a creek bottom and a food source, an egg plot, and I got set up and it was perfect timing, and I'm just chilling in the tree, and I see my buck front hanging on my gear strap in front of me. And I was like, what the heck, I'm gonna give this a shot. It was a few minutes before daylight, so I gave a quick little buck grunt, and up on the tree line above me where that egg plot was, it exploded. And it sounded like a high school track meet running down through the timber towards me. And it was not just one buck, it was two bucks. And they ran within about 20 yards of me, and I could vaguely see silhouettes of these two deer just milling around. One of them grunted, and then they started fighting. And I'm sitting there in my tree in the dark with my bow in my hand. I can't shoot, and I'm just listening to these two bucks fight. And I am so mad at myself. Why did I fall for that guy's recommendation of grunting in the dark before I could even shoot 15 to 20 yards out from my tree? Sat there and I watched them. They finally, they split up, they stopped fighting. One of them just continued down into the creek, and the other one milled around almost till it was time to where I could shoot, and then he just turned and walked out a shot distance and through the brush, and he was gone. On that hunt, neither one of them were what you would call quality deer. They were, maybe 120-inch bucks. But I wasn't there for a trophy hunt. I was there to fill a tag. I wanted to get meat in my freezer. And I would have harvested either one of those bucks. Had I waited until I could see 15 yards from my tree and hit that buck grunt, I would have got a shot at one or maybe both of those deer. So I share that story to just drive home the fact that as you're cruising through Facebook, as you're watching YouTube videos, when you come to a show like this and there's some 50-year-old one-legged dude talking to you for 45 minutes, sharing with you his knowledge and wisdom, it doesn't always mean it's the best information. And you, as the hunter, have to filter all of that to make sure it's the knowledge that you want to apply to your 60-30-10 principle. Tactics and training. We're going to talk about training first. And this is where I really hit the meat and potatoes of my background and why I'm standing here. Anytime we tried or obtained a new piece of gear, we would train with that in an environment where we could learn exactly how it worked, we could learn exactly how it failed, and we could learn exactly how we were going to use it in the field. And you never took it into the field until you had accomplished those other two. And we did that because it saved lives and it made you successful. And many of you in here have probably had a lone wolf encounter like I shared when I first kicked this off. You got a new piece of kit, you took no time to train with it or figure out how it was going to work into your typical routine. You took it out into the woods and it's typically in the dark, and it failed, or it caused you a lot of frustration, or maybe it caused a minor injury, most likely caused you to sit in that tree all morning and not see any deer, right? So I call it groundwork. I spent several weeks once I decided that I was going to leave my lone wolf climber behind and become a saddle hunter. I spent several weeks, when I say several, meaning like 3 weeks, going out almost every day, doing everything and starting from the ground level. The first, I did some research on my stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. I figured out what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, and I watched a ton of videos on it, and I picked a couple of people. One of them was the do-it-yourself sportsman. He had a really, really good quality video out on one-sticking, and that was one of the factors that drove me to being a one-sticker. And I've only owned this stick. This is the only stick that I've ever owned right here. It's all I've ever done. When I watched that video, I knew that I wanted to be a one-sticker. And it wasn't if I could be a one-sticker. It was I was going to put forth the time and effort in figuring out how I was going to be a one-sticker. So I got all of this stuff, and I stayed at ground level, and I managed my groundwork, doing ground drills. I put my platform on the tree right next to the ground, and I practiced hooking up my tether. And I and I sat back into my saddle and I played with different angles. I played with different settings on where my tether was and how long my bridge was or how short it was and where it was on the bridge loops. And then I took my platform off the tree and I put my stick on the tree, and the only thing that I dealt with was my stick. And I wanted to see how the stick felt. And I tried to make it fail. What I mean by try to make it fail, I would do things to it to make it kick out. I would play with my daisy chain on how I attached it to the tree, how tight it was, how loose it was, at what angles it was at. And then I would do things to it to make it kick out. And then I put them together. I put my platform and my stick together, and I did the same thing. And I did it what we call slick. I was just in shorts and a t-shirt or pants and a t-shirt. I didn't have anything else on, just my saddle. I was tethered in, and I did everything that I could to make those two pieces of equipment fail me at ground level. And then I started adding everything else onto it. And then once I had my pack on and I was doing it, and I put my gear strap on and I hung everything on my gear strap that I thought that I would want in the peak of rut. And I played with everything. And I made sure that that flow was solid before I ever went up to 20 feet. When I transitioned to 20 feet, I started all over again. And the first thing that I did was I climbed up 20 feet, and I did it with my tether and a lineman's belt, because I watched a lot of videos where guys climbed with or without a lineman's belt with their tether. So I tried that, didn't like it. I didn't feel that I needed it. I did that all the way up. I came back down. I did it with just my tether. Once I got back up to height, then I started playing with that stick. And everything that I executed at the ground level, I did it again at 20 feet. Because it's different when you leave the ground and you go to 20 feet. I'm not afraid of heights. Some people get a little nervous at height. It's different when you go 20 feet up in the air. I don't care who you are. Came back down, I got the platform, I did the same thing. And then I started introducing all my gear. And then I eventually ended up in the tree at 20 feet doing the whole thing. And I always tried to make my gear fail. And I did that so that when I had that one moment out in the woods, when I was hunting, and I might have an offhand shot, or I have a backside shot, and I'm putting different pressures onto my stick, my step, or my platform, I knew what the limitations were, and I also knew where that breaking point for me was, that if it was going to shift, I could anticipate that, and I would apply that into my shot scenario. And it's made me a very successful saddle hunter. I don't have any issues when I climb. I don't cut my shins up when I climb. I know what my gear is going to do because I spent time on the ground playing with it before I ever took it into the field. How many of you don't have to raise your hands, but I play on Facebook a lot, and you watch all these guys, especially it might be in the middle of hunting season, and they have a horror story. They're like, oh man, I've been in my climber for 20 years and I love my Summit climber, and you guys talked me into buying all this saddle gear. So I ordered all this stuff and it arrived on a Thursday night, and I got up Friday morning at 4 o'clock in the morning and I packed all this stuff, and I walked a mile and a half into the woods in the dark, and I found a tree, and I tried to climb that tree, and it was the most miserable experience of my life. I was hot, I was sweaty, I couldn't get it to work right. I banged up my shin on my stick because it kicked out, and I was hanging in the tree, and it took me over an hour to get up and get set. And I never saw any deer that day. It's the loudest, most uncomfortable. It's the worst thing that I've ever done in my life, and my stuff is up for sale. It's not the gear's fault. That guy did everything absolutely wrong. He failed himself and potentially walked away from a hunting system that is far better than any other elevated style of hunting. That's Aaron Ritter's opinion. So that is your 60% of knowledge, training, and tactics. It's what I call the KT tape of my hunt, KTT. The tactics, I'm not going to get into tactics today because you've already listened to guys today that are far better whitetail hunters than I am, so I don't necessarily need to share my tactics. If you want to know how I hunt, I'm going to be here all night and for most tomorrow morning, and I'm here for you guys so we can sit down and talk all that you want. So that's my 60%. Let's talk about 30%. Equipment and technology. So this is a huge part of your hunt as well. And right here, and I'm not going to do a demo right now. If anybody wants to see me climb when I'm done, then I will, but Greg is like the grandfather of one sticking, and he put on a great show this morning. I'm not going to climb for you guys. This is my gear. When I decided to shift to saddles, I spent a lot of time doing market research, watching videos, sifting through the good, the bad, and the gray area to figure out how I wanted to do it, and I settled on being a one sticker. This is a very inexpensive API stick that I had cut to 17 inches, put standoffs and steps on it and a Versa button, and I use a daisy chain. Why 17 inches? Because at 17 inches, I can stand on that bottom step and I can hook the top step right behind my knee. So as a one sticker, when I'm moving things around and if I have slack in my line, which Greg talked about, and I will talk about that as well, when I have that slack in my line and I'm shifting my tether, I can lock one leg behind that step and I'm secure on my stick. It gives me a little more balance and leverage. That's why that stick is that distance. And I'm in the market for a new stick. I'm waiting on Latitude to come out with theirs. And I look for sticks that are going to fit that sizing for me because it's a key part of what I do when I climb. My platform, in my opinion, when I bought that platform for the price point, it was the best choice for me on the market. For the surface area of this platform and for the weight, it's the tethered Predator. It was just the right choice and it's worked great. And for me, it's been bulletproof. I have hundreds of climbs and sits on that platform and it's never failed me. So that's why I use that. I use a 40-foot tether. And I use a 40-foot tether for a couple of reasons. And one of them, Greg covered it this morning, was I'm a one sticker, so I rappel out of the tree. It makes no sense for me to try to one stick with a standard tether. I rappel out of the tree. It's very fast. It's very efficient. The other reason why I do it is because I'm missing a leg. If nobody's noticed that, I'm missing a leg. And although this thing has never fallen off in any type of an operation that I've been in, and I served 9 years on a metal leg in special operations, not even coming out of airplanes or anything, my leg it's never fell off. I could tell you a really funny story about one time that it did, but it was in a bar and it wasn't out in the field. But if for some reason my leg decided to fall off, I can just rappel out of the tree. I can put it back on. I can climb back up the tree and I keep hunting. If I'm on a regular tether, well, that's going to be a little more interesting. And I will self-arrest, I promise you, but it's going to take a lot more time. It's going to take a lot more energy. It's not as efficient. And this is just far better. I have a friend here that I convinced to saddle hunt. And when he started, he went with multi-sticks and he went with a standard tether. He didn't want to do the rappel thing. And it took one bad climb for him where he had to have an awkward trip back down the tree with multiple sticks on a standard tether. And when he was done with that hunt, he called me on the phone and he was like, tell me about this 40-foot tether and how you rappel because I'm not doing that ever again. See, I'm going to introduce multiple sticks into my saddle setup so that when I go to an area and I know that I'm going to hunt there for 3 days, 5 days, and I might find a tree that I really, really like. It's going to happen in Nebraska this November. I'm going to go back to the tree that I killed in last November, and I'm going to put 4 sticks in a platform and a 40-foot tether in that tree so that whenever I go to that tree, all I have to do is hook my ascender onto it and run up the tree and I'm hunting. I'm still going to keep my one stick set up so I can still be mobile and I can run and gun and find new areas to hunt. But I want to have a couple of setups with multiple sticks. So I am introducing that into my hunt this year. Tools and technology. We have some great technology. And again, I'm not talking about tactics and technology today and how it applies to my hunt because there's guys here with far greater experience with me and they're killers. I mean, they kill big animals. I'm a killer. I'm a freezer killer. Those guys are hunting big critters. So go get your information from them. So that's the 30%. So now we're back down to the 10%. We touched on that. There's not a whole lot more than you need to realize with the 10% other than there's no way that you can get away from that 10%. And I do have other gear here. If you want to talk to me about my other gear, we will. One thing that I did skip over, so I'm going to backtrack. I'm wearing Crispi Thor 2s right now. And the reason why I'm wearing those right now is because that's what I saddle hunt in. And I saddle hunt in those until it gets too cold for these. And then I put on insulated Crispis. And I do that because when you're climbing on your sticks, and when you're in a platform, and if you do it from dark to dark, day to day during the rut, being out here on the edge of this platform will fatigue your feet. If you're in, I've hunted in Solomon Speed Cross 3s. I've hunted in Solomon high top boots. I've GTXs. I've hunted in rubber boots. I've hunted in a lot of different styles of footwear in my saddle that had a real flexible sole, and it causes exhaustion. And some people don't realize where that fatigue is coming from, but it starts at your feet because it takes so much energy for your foot to keep from flexing on that platform, and for the edge, digging in to the midsole of your foot. If you get a real stiff boot, it's like you have an additional platform in the sole of your boot. I didn't ask Greg this morning, and I should have. He was wearing a certain type of boot this morning at 11 o'clock when he did his seminar, and he hasn't wore them. He wasn't wearing them yesterday, and he hasn't been wearing them the rest of the day. He put those on because that's what he wears when he saddle hunts, and there's a reason why he wears those. There's a reason for everything that I have here, and my footwear is one of them. Crispis are expensive. Not everybody wants to spend the money on Crispis. I highly encourage everybody here that if you're experiencing fatigue, and it transitions from your feet all the way up into your hips and your lower back, if you spend a lot of time in your saddle day in, day out, day after day during the hunting season, a stiff boot will save you from some of that fatigue. Okay? All right, so that's the 30%. The 10%, we've already talked about that. The deer have a vote. I don't care who you are, how lucky you are, how good of a hunter you are, no matter how well you put everything else together, that deer has a vote in your hunt. And sometimes they're gonna win. It's just the way it is. All right, so let's talk about the last piece that we're gonna talk about. And it's what I call calm breeds calm. Has anybody here ever not heard of Murphy? If you haven't, raise your hands. Murphy is like the mayhem of Allstate. You know, the commercial they have where he's like driving down the road, the car, and he's all beat up in the face. He's like, I'm the pothole. I'm the pothole when you're not paying attention, and he crashes the car and does all the damage, right? Well, that's kind of what Murphy is. When you need something to be smooth and you have a certain plan and you need everything to come together at the right moment at the right time, Murphy is that guy that opens up the door and he sticks his head in. He's like, hey man, can I throw a wrench in here? And when that happens, 9 times out of 10, it snowballs if you panic. If you panic in that moment, it's only going to get worse. And that's where calm breed calms come in. Calm breeds calm. If you've exercised that 60-30-10 process, when that moment happens, it's not going to have that big of an effect on you. And I'm going to use an example. We're going to talk about technical trees here in a minute. If you choose a tree that has a lot of lean to it, and that's one of the many benefits of a saddle. If you're climbing that tree and you lose your grip, or you get your point of connection on your tether in the wrong spot because it's going to pull you in a direction, and the lean of that tree is going to pull you in a direction, and gravity is going to take over, and you're going to swing under that tree. 100% that freaks some people out. And at that moment, Murphy just opened the door. And if you don't take control of that moment, Murphy's going to full on walk into your room. He's going to set up a gravity chair, and he's going to ruin the rest of your hunt, because once that takes place and you get stressed out and you can't recover from it, when you finally get up in the tree, rather than just saying, well, that was fun, and you had a plan and maybe you had already tested it and trained to it, you're up in that tree thinking that you completely ruined your hunt. You've scared everything in the woods around you. You're not going to see any deer. You get angry, you get frustrated, you ask yourself why you're even here. You might even just pack up your stuff and go home. That's what Murphy does. If you practice everything else, and if you stay calm, then that doesn't happen. People have asked me, do you really think saddle hunting is that safe? My answer is yes. I firmly believe that saddle hunting is more safe than traditional elevated hunting. And it's for the mere fact of how this system works. You may not realize it, but saddle hunting is one of the most high-risk activities in North America. It's ranked up there with skydiving. And the reason is because people, and there might be somebody here, don't call yourself out unless you want to, but there's people out there that think they can safely hunt out of a stand without any type of a harness on. And they're 100% wrong. Every year, people get severely injured and or die climbing trees during hunting season because they're not wearing a harness. When you saddle hunt, you, by the sheer mechanisms of what it is, you have to be in a harness. And not only that, a traditional harness is a full body harness, and you're connected on a tether that's in the middle of your back, the middle of your shoulder blades, and you secure it hard way above your head. So if you come out of that ladder stand or that climber or that lock on in that style of a harness, you're more or less a turtle on your back. You're hanging in that tree with that tether coming out from your back, and you can't reach the main point of it. And even if you do, if you unlock it, the process of trying to safely come down that tree, unlocking and then locking that belt that's holding your tether there, that's very sketchy. And that's if you can even get yourself turned around and get climbed up to it. With a saddle, this whole region right here, this is called your posterior chain. And if you're into athletics or physical fitness, you know how important this posterior chain is. This is where all of your balance and strength and power comes from in athletics. And when you're climbing in a saddle, your harness is wrapped around that posterior chain, and it's right here in front of you. So you now have all the power and self-arrest. And again, if you're not wearing a harness when you're saddle hunting, you're more or less putting up a lock on without wearing a harness. That's really what it is. So yes, I think it's more safe. And through that whole process, if you trust your gear, and if you have stressed your gear and you've practiced, and you know what's going to happen when you're up in that elevation, and you've gone through the motions of transitioning from a lineman's belt to a tether, and back from a tether back to a lineman's belt, as you're working and navigating through what I call a technical tree, you're far more confident. You're not going to get stressed, and you're going to react to that scenario a whole lot differently than if it's the first time it's ever happened and you're in the dark trying to climb that tree. So what's a technical tree? This is pretty quick, because once I explain it, everybody's going to know and understand. With a climber, you're looking for something that's straight and has 0 limbs, unless you can clip it or saw it easily and quickly and keep driving on. And that's what you're stuck climbing. In a saddle, we can hunt pretty much anything in the woods. It's one of the many things about saddle hunting that I was attracted to. And I am attracted to hunting technical trees. Again, this gentleman over here mentioned it earlier today that he rarely climbs anything other than a technical tree. When you can get up into that natural cover, the deer do not pay any attention to you. You now have the upper hand. That 10% that I'm talking about, this pure luck, that may have just changed to 5% if you get up into a technical tree. It takes more time. It may not be the fastest tree in the woods that you can climb. It doesn't really take a whole lot more energy to do it if you've been practicing it. It's far more effective. But I caution you to practice, because when you start making moves, this is where a one sticker can fall into a safety hazard, because now you're transitioning back and forth from that climbing belt, that lineman's belt, to your tether and back. You're unclipping, you're clipping back in, you're closing and locking gates, you're unlocking gates. So if you haven't practiced that, again, that's part of that 60% of knowledge, training, and tactics. You've spent time doing that, so you're not doing it in the dark, or you're not coming out of the tree after you've put an arrow in the buck of a lifetime, because you're gonna forget to do stuff when that moment happens, especially if you haven't sat up in that tree long enough to have a Snickers and take a breath and get your wits about you. The first time I ever left the house to hunt on my own without my dad, he left me a note in my pile of gear by the front door, and he wrote a few things, and I carry that note on me everywhere I go and hunt, and I've had that note with me since 1989. It's on a yellowed, weathered piece of notebook paper. It's in a Ziploc bag with the same Band-Aid that he put in that bag, and I've had it with me on every single hunt all over the world ever since that day. And one of the things that he put on that note was, the first thing you do, Aaron, is take your knife off and put it on the ground so you don't cut yourself and you get your shit together. That was the best piece of advice my father ever gave me. So with all of that said, everything that I've said, I'm going to close with this. We've talked about the 60-30-10 principle. 60% knowledge, training, and tactics. It's your KT tape of your hunt. 30% tools and technology or equipment, and 10% luck. We talked about calm breeds calm, and we've talked about tackling technical trees. The last thing I'm going to say is, you have a why. There's a reason why you saddle hunt, or there's a reason why you hunt out of a lock-on. Make sure that that why is your why. It's not somebody else's why, and you make that why the best that it can be. You become the best you can be at that why. I chose one sticking, and I'm becoming the best that I can be at that one stick. I'm wearing a shirt, and they are for sale. It's a Be Limitless shirt, and on the back of it, it says, burn the ships. And if you don't know what that means, it's a legend of Cortez. When Cortez came from Spain to the Americas, his intent was to conquer the Americas, and his crews did not want to conquer the Americas because it was a different environment, and it was going to be nasty and very difficult. It was daunting. So Cortez sent men to his ships that were anchored out in the water, and he burned them into the sea so that there was no return. The only way they had was forward. So in your saddle hunting career, when you leave today, I encourage you to look at the things that you do or the things that you might want to do and make that decision and burn your ships and go be the best that you can be at it today. And I've been asked 3 times today alone, what am I doing here and what am I selling? Where's your booth? Well, the only thing that I'm selling is motivation and inspiration. That's all I get. A couple of hats and some t-shirts. If you want a hat or a t-shirt, I can sell you that. Other than that, all I'm doing is selling you guys motivation and inspiration, and that's all I have for you today. Again, I'm Aaron Ritter. I am Limitless Outdoors, and I hope you guys live a limitless lifestyle. It was a pleasure being here today. Thank you.